Arrogant cop orders veteran to take off her jacket, then salutes after noticing her back scar. The sharp voice of a brash cop pierced a quiet small-town grocery store as he ordered a veteran to remove her jacket, an act of disrespect loaded with ignorance. What the officer didn't realize was that beneath the worn sweater stood Mara Dalton, a retired Navy SEAL whose silent scars and unspoken sacrifices carried the weight of battles few could imagine. As tension swelled, a single moment, a scar revealed, a salute given, would shatter assumptions, command profound respect, and remind everyone that true strength lies not in noise or pride, but in presence, honor, and resilience. This is the story of a forgotten hero reclaiming dignity against the odds, showing us how the quietest warriors often carry the heaviest burdens, and why their stories deserve to be told. And before I forget, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories reach. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. I guarantee you won't want to miss it. Now let's jump in. The small town of Willows Creek, nestled in the Colorado foothills, didn't often make the news. People came here to disappear, to slow down, or to forget. And for Mara Dalton, it was all three. She moved through the morning fog like a ghost, her boots soft against the gravel shoulder of the road. A faded army green jacket clung to her frame, a little too big, the kind issued years ago to those who didn't ask for replacements. On the back, a barely visible patch, the outline of a trident, faded almost to nothing. Most wouldn't notice it. Most never looked that close. Mara didn't speak much in town. She volunteered at the community garden, read paperback novels by the window at the diner, never raised her voice, and no one thought to ask about the way she always kept to herself. Some assumed she was just another burned-out soul passing through. But the truth was far older, heavier, and stitched into every thread of that jacket. That morning, she stood outside the county courthouse, waiting for the clerk's office to open. She held a manila envelope in one hand, papers inside still warm from the printer. It had taken weeks to track down her late brother's discharge records, a bureaucratic mess of red tape. She wanted to file them with the city to get his military headstone approved. Mara had done this before, too many times, for fallen friends, for her father, for ghosts. But that morning, Willows Creek had a new deputy, fresh out of academy, badge still shining, temper still sharp. He spotted Mara from across the plaza and walked toward her with a bounce in his step and authority in his eyes. "Hey, you can't loiter here," he said, voice louder than necessary. Mara turned, met his gaze with a calm nod. "I'm just waiting for the clerk's office to open." "Still, you can't stand around like that. Let me see some ID." She handed it over, slow and silent. He looked it over, annoyed she hadn't pushed back. "What's in the envelope?" he asked. "Military records," she said plainly. He squinted at her jacket. "And what's that? You military, or just playing dress-up?" Something in the plaza grew still. A woman walking her dog slowed. The courthouse doors remained shut. Mara's voice didn't change. "It was my brother's. He died wearing it." The deputy scoffed. "Right. Then take it off. Can't wear military identifiers if you didn't earn them. It's impersonation." She blinked, but said nothing. He stepped closer. "I said take it off." And then, as the morning sun crept through the clouds, Mara turned her back to him to unbutton the jacket. As the fabric shifted, the breeze caught the edge and lifted it slightly, revealing the faint, brutal scar that ran diagonally across her shoulder blades. Deep, surgical, the kind earned far from any hospital. He froze, not because of the scar, but because of the tattoo beneath it. A blacking trident, clear as day now. And above it, one word etched in flesh: Valkyrie. His jaw opened. Then slowly, as if his training just caught up to his ego, the young officer stepped back and raised his hand in a trembling salute. "And Mara?" She simply rebut-toned the jacket. The young deputy's salute hung in the morning air, suspended like breath in winter. He didn't know what Valkyrie meant, not really. But he'd heard the stories. Whispers from instructors. Legends buried deep in briefing rooms. The name had surfaced once during a seminar on unconventional warfare tactics. A woman embedded with SEAL teams. A ghost. A myth. And now she stood in front of him. No medals, no fanfare. Just silence and a jacket that didn't need defending. I didn't know, he murmured. You didn't ask, Mara said quietly, eyes still fixed on the horizon. She turned toward the courthouse steps, boots clicking softly as the doors finally unlocked. The clerk inside greeted her with a knowing nod. He had been stationed in Ramadi, back in '07. He didn't speak of it either. But that morning, as Mara passed him the envelope, his fingers brushed hers, just long enough to say I remember. Outside, the deputy remained on the plaza, one hand still hovering near his temple. He hadn't lowered the salute. Not until she disappeared through the doors. Inside, the hallway was lined with outdated posters about veterans' benefits and flag protocol. Mara waited patiently as the clerk scanned the documents. He looked up. Your brother served under your name? She nodded. Long story. Different last name. We shared everything else. Special operations? She hesitated. He didn't talk about it, but he left pieces behind. The clerk stamped the papers, then slid them back across the counter. It'll be approved by next week. I'll expedite it. Mara gave a small, grateful nod. Not because of the favor, but because he didn't ask more. Some people wanted the war stories. Others knew better. She stepped back into the light and felt the air shift. The plaza was quiet. A few people had stopped to watch. Not the salute, but what came after. The way the young officer suddenly stood at attention. The way he looked, not embarrassed, but changed. Mara moved past him without a word, but her presence lingered. Not in a confrontational way. It wasn't about putting him in his place. It never had been. It was about reminding him that some things run deeper than what you see. That scars don't always scream. Sometimes they whisper. Later that afternoon, the story spread. Not loud, not viral. Just quiet conversations in the diner. Did you hear what happened outside the courthouse? That woman, Mara, she's someone. Someone important? No, someone heavy. Old Mr. Kellen, who ran the hardware store, sipped his coffee and stared out the window. That's the thing about real warriors, he said. They never come looking for thanks. But when the moment comes, the world pauses. Someone near the counter asked what he meant. Kellen didn't answer, just tapped the rim of his mug twice, then went back to staring. Back at home, Mara removed her jacket, folded it neatly, and placed it beside a photograph on the shelf. Her brother, laughing, young, wind in his hair. A photo taken before their last deployment. Before the mission went sideways. Before she carried him out of a burning truck, 2 bullets in her leg, and half the world collapsing around them. She never wore the jacket for show. She wore it because it was the only piece of him that survived. Mara's house sat on the outskirts of Willows Creek, where the gravel turned to dust and the power lines thinned into silence. A single-story structure with a sagging porch and creaky steps. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She'd built it herself, plank by plank, with salvaged wood and time no one else could claim. Inside, the air was still. Not the kind of stillness that weighed heavy, but the kind you earn. There were no photos on the walls. No trophies. No war memorabilia. Just a few books. Some old vinyl. A folded flag in a glass case that hadn't been touched in years. She moved through her home like someone who knew where every creek lived. Her body bore the slow stiffness of past injuries. Things never fully healed, but long since accepted. She made tea. No sugar. Sat on the edge of the armchair, sipping quietly, facing the window. That was where she kept the quiet room. It wasn't a room in the traditional sense. Just a small corner of the house, curtained off, where she kept 4 things: the jacket, the photograph, a rusted K-bar knife, and a sealed letter. The letter had her brother's handwriting on the outside. She'd never opened it. She told herself it was better that way, that whatever it said had already been lived. But the truth was more fragile. She was afraid the words inside might make her feel too much. And she couldn't afford to feel too much. Not when she still had things to carry. That night, as the wind picked up across the hills, Mara sat outside on the porch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. A distant coyote howled. Somewhere nearby, a fence rattled. And then headlights appeared in the distance, slow and deliberate. A sheriff's cruiser pulled into the gravel drive. tires crunching until they stopped just before the gate. The same deputy stepped out. No swagger now. No bark in his stride. Just quiet boots against dirt. Mara didn't move. She didn't speak. He approached slowly, stopping at the edge of the porch like he knew this wasn't his ground to claim. "I'm sorry," he said. Mara studied him. He fidgeted. "I asked around. Someone at the VA said Valkyrie was real. Said she pulled 2 men out of a black site in Kandahar during the Red Crescent operation. Said she disappeared after that. I didn't know it was you." Mara set her tea down. "Most people don't," she said. He nodded. "Still, I should have seen it. The way you carried yourself. That wasn't just a jacket. That was history." Mara's eyes softened. "You're young. Eager. You were doing your job. That's how mistakes happen." He looked down. "I didn't come here for forgiveness. I came to ask something." She raised an eyebrow. "If you're willing, would you come speak to the new recruits? At the academy? About presence. About what silence can mean." There was a long pause. Mara leaned back in her chair. "I don't do speeches. You wouldn't have to. Just be in the room." She didn't answer. But in the quiet that followed, he took that as a maybe. And it was more than he'd expected. When he left, Mara stood beneath the stars, jacket draped over her arm. The wind lifted it slightly. And for the first time in a long time, she thought about opening the letter. Not yet, but soon. Morning came slow, golden, and warm. The kind of morning that softened sharp memories. But for Mara, memory didn't sleep. It stirred in her muscles, settled in the way her feet hit the floor, deliberate and steady. She moved like someone trained to measure every step. She stood at the bathroom mirror, brushing her silver-flecked hair into a tight knot. The scar on her back peaked just above the collar of her shirt, raised, pale, and precise. A surgeon's cut, a field surgeon's desperation. The kind of scar that told a story most people weren't equipped to hear. She rarely looked at it. But this morning, she turned slightly, held her breath, studied it. There were nights she remembered the sound of the rotors, the smell of burning oil, the crackle of a broken radio. She didn't miss war. She missed the clarity, the moment when everything made sense because it had to. That scar had been the cost of carrying someone else out of a bad call, a green recruit too deep in a mission he wasn't ready for. She took the shrapnel. He made it home. She never saw him again. Mara headed into town, this time without the jacket. Just a plain black shirt and worn jeans. She didn't want attention. She wanted to blend back in, to become part of the background again. But something had shifted. People noticed her now. A subtle nod from the post office clerk. A longer glance from the diner waitress. Even the mechanic, who rarely spoke unless it was about engines, raised 2 fingers in silent respect as she passed by. The plaza where it had all happened was empty now, but echoes lingered in quiet spaces. Not of shame or spectacle, just recognition. At the diner, the cook, Jesse, a veteran himself, slid her usual order across the counter before she even asked. He didn't say anything. Didn't need to. But before walking away, he did murmur, "Still got the jacket?" Mara smiled faintly. "Still fits." After breakfast, she walked past the schoolyard where kids screamed and laughed in chaotic joy. One boy, no older than 10, stood near the chain-link fence, holding a toy plane with chipped wings. He spotted her as she passed. "Hey," he called out. "You were in the army, right?" Mara stopped, turned. He ran up, holding the little plastic plane out. "My dad was, too." He said people who don't talk about it are usually the real deal. She crouched to his height, looked him in the eye. "Your dad's a smart man. Did you fly one of these?" he asked, gesturing to the toy. "No," she said softly. "But I jumped out of a few." His eyes widened. "Like a superhero?" She chuckled, but there was no mockery in it. Not even close. And then, because something in his eyes reminded her of younger days, she placed her hand gently on the toy's fuselage and added, "But I rode with them." He beamed. As she walked away, the boy watched her for a long time. That night, she returned to the quiet room. The jacket still sat there. And beside it, the letter. This time, she picked it up. Still sealed. Still unread. But tonight, she slipped it into her pocket. Whatever came next, she felt ready. The wind had picked up again that night. Willows Creek never truly quieted. The air rolled in from the hills like a whisper from the past, stirring loose leaves, memories, and resolve. Mara sat at her kitchen table beneath a single low-hanging light bulb. The letter lay in front of her, its edges slightly worn, the ink on the envelope faded but still legible. To M. Dalton, if I don't make it. She traced the letters with her fingertips. Her brother's handwriting, tight, precise, and rushed. The kind of penmanship soldiers used in the in-between moments, when their hands trembled but their words had to stand still. She had carried this letter across continents, packed it away through 3 moves, and never once dared to open it. Not until now. She took a deep breath and slid her finger under the flap. The paper inside unfolded like it had been waiting, too. Mara, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And I'm sorry. I know you hate this kind of thing, the drama, the final words. But you also know how things go when the radios go quiet. I needed to leave something behind in case you couldn't carry everything on your own anymore. You always carried too much. You always carried me. I remember when you first took that SEAL trident. You told me it didn't make you invincible, it made you accountable. That stuck with me. You always said you didn't fight for glory. You fought to bring people home. And you did, Mara. Even when it broke you. I don't know how long you'll keep wearing my jacket. But if you're still wearing it, it means you haven't stopped protecting people. That's who you are. You protect, even when they don't deserve it. But you need to know something. You did enough. You did more than anyone should have ever asked of you. And if they don't salute you in the street, if they walk past you like you're no one, that's okay. Because I remember everything you did. And if I'm not here to say it out loud, then let this letter do it for me. You're the bravest person I ever knew. You were my North Star. You were Valkyrie long before they gave you that name. So if today was heavy, if someone said something stupid or forgot who you are, don't carry it. Let it go. You don't owe them silence anymore. I love you. Always. James. Mara didn't cry. Not right away. She folded the letter slowly, deliberately, and held it against her chest. The kitchen was so still she could hear the refrigerator humming, the tick of the wall clock, the faintest rustle of wind outside. She let the moment wash over her like a wave that had waited a decade to break. She closed her eyes, whispered, "Thank you, Jimmy." And for the first time in years, the jacket stayed on its hook. 3 days passed. Mara moved through them like she always did, quietly. She returned to the garden, tended the late summer soil, trimmed the lavender shrubs along the school fence. She answered no questions about what happened outside the courthouse. People had seen what they needed to. They were still talking, but never to her directly. She didn't mind. But the letter had changed something. It didn't make her louder. It didn't make her softer. It made her present. And people noticed. On the 4th day, a plain white envelope arrived in her mailbox. No stamp. No sender. Inside was a single card, handwritten in blue ink. Mara, we're hosting a recognition ceremony this Saturday for community service and veterans' contributions. The sheriff insisted your name be read. No speeches required. No uniforms needed. But it would mean something if you came. Jessie. She sat on her porch, turning the card in her hand. The idea of a ceremony unsettled her. She wasn't a headline. She didn't want applause. But the word recognition lingered. Not celebration. Not spectacle. Just acknowledgement. And maybe, for once, that was enough. The next morning, she walked into the diner just after sunrise. Jessie was behind the counter, prepping trays of eggs and bacon. He looked up, a little surprised to see her this early. Mara held up the card. You sent this. He gave a short nod, eyes steady. Thought about it for a while. She slid onto the stool. Why now? Jessie leaned on the counter. Because for years, you've carried this town and let us pretend we didn't know. You fixed the generator at the shelter. You taught that teen from out east how to weld when nobody else had time. You sat with Donna Harrell's boy every Friday night after his dad passed. And you never said a word. That's what people do, she replied. No, Jessie said. That's what you do. She looked away. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. I'm not a symbol, she said quietly. I know. That's why you're the right one. Saturday came fast. Mara stood at her bedroom mirror, hands hovering over a neat pile on the dresser. A simple charcoal blouse, dark jeans, polished boots, and next to them, The jacket. She stared at it for a long time, then reached underneath the pile and pulled out a narrow wooden box she hadn't touched in years. Inside were her brother's dog tags, her own, and a single ribbon, Navy Cross. She hadn't worn it in public since the day she received it, under protest. But tonight felt different. As the sun dipped below the ridgeline, Mara stepped out of her house and onto the porch. She wasn't in uniform, but she was unmistakably prepared. In her hand, she held the wooden box. Not to display, just to carry. She didn't walk like a hero. She walked like someone who'd stopped hiding. And that, somehow, was more powerful. The Willows Creek Town Hall wasn't built for grand occasions. It had folding chairs, a wooden podium with a chipped corner, and faded red, white, and blue bunting that someone pulled from a dusty box every year. But tonight, it held something heavier than celebration. It held respect. Families filled the rows. Local business owners, teachers, kids who didn't yet understand the weight of a uniform, but could feel the difference in the air. The sheriff stood near the back, arms crossed, his gaze flicking to the door every few seconds. Jesse was near the front, wearing his only clean flannel. Then the door opened, and Mara walked in. The room didn't erupt. It didn't gasp, but it quieted, not in obligation, but in reverence. She wore the charcoal blouse. Her brother's dog tags hung low around her neck, barely visible beneath the collar. In her hand was the narrow wooden box. Her steps were calm, unbroken, the kind of stride you couldn't teach, only earn. She sat in the second row, far left. A few people turned to acknowledge her. Some gave small nods. A woman from the flower shop touched her heart briefly before looking away. The ceremony began like any other, recognition of volunteers, fundraisers, and school board members. A local firefighter spoke about community trust. An elderly Marine veteran received a handshake for 40 years of service with the VFW. And then Sheriff Keller stepped to the podium. He was a hard man to read. Not cold, just trained to withhold more than he revealed. He cleared his throat, scanning the room. "I'm not one for speeches," he said, glancing at his notes. "But sometimes a name deserves more than ink." He looked up, locking eyes with Mara. "This town is full of good people. Quiet ones. Folks who carry more than we know. And every now and then, someone walks among us who's lived through storms we can't imagine, and never once asked for recognition." He held up a single envelope. "Tonight, we honor Mara Dalton. For her service, here and elsewhere." He didn't read off medals. He didn't list operations or citations. He just paused, then added, "If you know, you know." And with that, he stepped back. No dramatic music. No forced applause. Just a slow, rising standing ovation that began with Jesse, then spread across the room like dawn breaking. Mara didn't stand. She didn't wave. She placed the wooden box in her lap and folded her hands over it. But her eyes shimmered, and that was enough. After the ceremony, people came in small waves. A few handshakes. A pat on the shoulder. A young girl asked if she could sit beside Mara for a minute. Mara let her. "Was it scary?" the girl asked. Mara didn't flinch. "Sometimes. But you still went." "Yes," Mara said, her voice quiet. "Because someone had to." The girl nodded like that made perfect sense. Outside, under a canopy of stars, Mara lingered by the steps. The deputy who once tried to strip her of her jacket approached again. This time, he didn't speak. He just extended his hand. Mara shook it, then turned to walk home. And the sound of her boots on the pavement felt, for once, like a song the town had finally learned to hear. The next morning, light spilled through the kitchen window, soft and golden. Mara stood at the sink, rinsing out her coffee mug, when she noticed something tucked beneath her front door. She walked over slowly, opened the door, and picked up a small manila envelope. No return address, no name. Inside, there was only a photo. It was old, grainy, slightly curled at the corners. It showed 4 soldiers standing in front of a CH-47 Chinook helicopter, rotors frozen mid-blur. Dust hung thick in the air. One of them, unmistakably younger, dirt-smudged, and wearing a half-smile, was Mara. The other 3? Gone. She sat down at the table, the weight of memory settling like fog. She hadn't seen this photo in years. Maybe someone had found it in a locker. Maybe someone from her old unit was still alive, still out there. On the back of the photo, scribbled in pencil, "For when you forget who you are." No signature, but she knew the handwriting. She'd seen it once before, in a letter. It was Jimmy's. She stared at the photo for a long time, then rose slowly and walked to the quiet room. The jacket hung on its usual hook. The knife sat in its place. But today, she picked up the photo and placed it next to the folded flag. For the first time in years, that little room didn't feel like a shrine to ghosts. It felt like a place where memory and presence could sit side by side. That afternoon, she visited the local high school. The deputy had followed through. He'd passed along her name to the academy in Fort Carson. And to her surprise, the academy director had asked if she'd be willing to start local, speaking to young cadets at the high school's new JROTC program. She hadn't committed, but she hadn't said no either. As she stepped through the glass double doors, the young instructor, Lieutenant Ramirez, greeted her with something between awe and composure. "Ms. Dalton," he said, "it's an honor." She shook his hand, noting how firmly he held it, how he kept his eyes steady, not as a show of dominance, as respect. He gestured to a modest classroom filled with about 20 teens in uniform. Some sat upright with pride. Others slouched, playing with the straps on their packs. But all of them turned when Mara entered. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't walk to the front. She simply stood by the wall, arms loosely folded, and watched. Ramirez cleared his throat. "Cadets, we have a guest today. I want you to observe how she enters a room. How she doesn't need to say anything to command attention. A pause. You may never reach her level, but you can learn from her presence." Mara gave a quiet smile, subtle and brief. One cadet raised his hand. "Were you Delta?" She shook her head. "Navy. SEAL." A pause. Then, "Yes." Gasps. A few elbows. Ramirez held up a hand. Let her speak on her terms. But Mara didn't speak. She just walked slowly to the chalkboard, picked up a piece of white chalk, and wrote 3 words. "Hold the line." She turned to face them. "That's all you really need to know," she said. "About me. Or about service." The classroom was silent. The kind of silence that felt earned, not imposed. Chalk dust hung lightly in the air. The phrase "hold the line" sat on the board, stark and simple, but it carried more weight than any speech she could have given. One cadet, a tall boy with nervous hands, raised his voice hesitantly. "What does it mean?" Mara looked at him, not with judgment, but with the kind of eyes that had once scanned a perimeter for movement at 3 a.m. in Helmand Province. "It means everything," she said. A few students shifted in their seats. "It means," she continued, "when the plan fails, when the radios go dead, when no one is coming, and no one knows what to do, you don't break. You don't run. You don't shout. You hold the line." Each word landed like gravel poured slow into a steel bucket. Another cadet asked, "Even if it's just you?" "Especially if it's just you," she said, voice low but firm. "Because if you hold, others might find the strength to do the same." She walked the rows slowly, stopping by a girl in the back, posture too stiff, eyes a little too sharp. Mara saw herself in that one. Not in the uniform, in the armor underneath it. "You want to serve?" she asked her. "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" The girl hesitated. "Because I want to be strong." Mara nodded. "You already are. But service isn't about showing strength. It's about giving it away." The girl blinked. "Giving it away?" Mara leaned in slightly. "To the person next to you. To someone who's scared. To someone who's lost the will to fight. You hold the line, not for glory, but so they can catch their breath." She straightened. "That's what strength is." Afterward, she slipped out quietly while Ramirez thanked the cadets and dismissed them. He caught up to her at the side door. "You said you didn't do speeches," he said with a quiet grin. "I didn't," she replied. "Just answered a question." He nodded, serious now. "They won't forget today. They shouldn't remember me," she said. "Just the lesson. That's the kind they remember most." She looked out at the parking lot. A few parents were waiting in cars. A boy leaned against a fence, staring at the chalkboard through the window. Ramirez stepped closer. "They call people like you legends. Ghosts. Myths. But you showed up today and proved you're real." Mara shrugged. "Maybe. But ghosts don't leave footprints. Yours are all over this town, he said. She didn't respond. Didn't need to. Later that evening, she stopped by the old park bench near the war memorial. Her brother's name was etched there now, along with 5 others from their region. It had taken her 3 years to push the paperwork through. She ran her fingers over the engraving. Still holding it, she whispered. The sun dipped low. A breeze stirred the trees. Somewhere nearby, a bell tower rang. And in that quiet, the ghosts didn't haunt her. They stood beside her, still holding the line. The following Monday, Mara needed milk. She didn't shop much, only when the shelves were empty and the fridge looked more like a storage unit than a kitchen appliance. The local grocery store wasn't far, just a quiet corner shop where locals wandered the aisles like they were walking through memories, not produce sections. She didn't expect attention. She never did. But she noticed the hush as she walked through the entrance. Not judgmental, just aware. Like people had finally seen her. Not the version that read books at the diner or fixed fences, but the one who carried something far older than her years. She made her way to the back fridge, the cold air brushing her skin through the fabric of her flannel. Her fingers wrapped around the milk handle just as someone cleared their throat behind her. She turned. It was the young deputy. No uniform today, just jeans and a department hoodie. He looked different out of uniform. More like a kid who had stumbled into a history book and realized the pages were real. I didn't mean to ambush you, he said. Just saw you and thought. She waited. I wanted to thank you, he said finally. Again. Mara nodded. You already did. He scratched the back of his neck. Yeah, I know. It's just, after the ceremony, I started reading. I found your name in an old declassified brief. The Red Crescent operation. It didn't say much, but it mentioned Valkyrie extraction protocol and 2 enemy intercepts neutralized during exfil. Was that? She didn't answer. Didn't need to. He nodded slowly. You save people. Mara looked at him for a long moment. Then, with a voice soft but sharp, said, Everyone in that unit saved someone. That's why they didn't come home. He lowered his head. She studied him. You're not a bad cop, she said. You're just young. Learn to listen before you act. Don't let the badge speak louder than your eyes. He nodded, then added, almost whispering, You're the first person I've ever saluted. She didn't smile, but her eyes carried a warmth that hadn't been there before. Make sure I'm not the last, she said. As Mara walked to the register, the woman behind the counter, Connie, who had worked there since Mara moved into town, gave her a small, folded receipt and a gentle smile. I covered it, she said. Mara blinked. You didn't have to. I know, but I wanted to. For Jimmy. Mara froze. Connie added quietly, I dated him once. Years ago, before the deployments. He said if anything ever happened to him, you'd be the one still standing. Mara didn't speak, but she reached across the counter and squeezed Connie's hand. No words. Just history between 2 women who'd loved the same ghost in different ways. Outside, the sky was shifting from blue to amber. Mara stepped into the warmth of the afternoon sun and realized that for the first time in a long while, her silence wasn't mistaken for distance. It was being heard. The night wrapped around Mara's house like a soft blanket. The stars were bright, scattered across the sky like shards of forgotten promises. Inside, the only sound was the steady tick of the wall clock and the occasional creak of the old floorboards settling. She was about to turn off the kitchen light when a soft knock came at the door. Mara paused. No one knocked at her door unless it was important. She opened it slowly. Standing there, silhouetted in the porch light, was an older man in a dark jacket. His face was lined, eyes tired but sharp. He looked like someone who had seen too many winters and too many battles, both personal and distant. Ms. Dalton, he said quietly. Name's Colonel Reed. Retired, but not forgotten. I heard about the ceremony, about what the town's been saying. I wanted to come by and say thank you. Mara blinked. Thank me, she asked, voice soft but cautious. For your service. For your sacrifice. For carrying things the rest of us tried to ignore. He pulled out a small folder, weathered and creased. This came from the Pentagon a few days ago. Classified, but cleared for personal delivery. Your unit's after-action reports. They're finally acknowledging what you all did in '09. Mara didn't move. The colonel stepped closer. You and James saved hundreds. The operation was a success because of you. But politics buried the story. You were ordered to disappear. The medals came years later, and even then, quietly. He paused. I was part of the command. I didn't speak up. For that, I'm sorry. Mara's eyes softened. You're here now. He nodded. I'm here now. They sat at her kitchen table, the folder open between them. Photos, declassified documents, even a letter from the Joint Chiefs praising her leadership. But none of it surprised Mara. She had never done it for recognition. She did it because it had to be done. Because her brother needed her to be strong when he wasn't. Because she believed in holding the line, no matter the cost. Before leaving, Colonel Reed placed a hand briefly on her shoulder. Will you consider telling your story? To the recruits? To the world? Mara looked up, eyes steady. I've started, she said. And I'll be here whenever you need. The colonel nodded and stepped back into the night. Mara closed the door, leaning against it as the weight of years lifted just a little. In the silence, she finally allowed herself to exhale. Days turned into weeks in Willows Creek, but the slow rhythm of the town didn't erase the weight Mara carried, or the quiet transformation that was beginning to take root. The dusty roads, the rustling trees, and the familiar hum of daily life were all constant backdrops to a deeper, more personal journey. Mara moved through it like a shadow carrying light, quiet, unassuming, but undeniably present. Her visits to the JROTC cadets became routine, but each meeting felt like a small victory. She never gave speeches or lectures. Instead, she shared fragments of her life, brief stories that hinted at pain, resilience, and the invisible burdens carried by those who serve. The kids listened, not because she commanded it, but because she earned it. They understood there was more beneath her calm surface, an unspoken history that shaped every word and every pause. One afternoon, after a particularly intense session focused on teamwork and the meaning of resilience, a cadet named Marcus lingered behind while the others filed out. His eyes were filled with a quiet earnestness as he approached. Ma'am, he said hesitantly, how do you keep going? After everything you've been through. Mara looked at him, her gaze soft but steady. The question was one she often asked herself in the quiet hours. Taking a breath, she answered simply, I remember who I'm holding the line for. Marcus nodded slowly, as if grasping the weight of her words. Like your brother? Yes, Mara replied, her voice low but resolute. But not just him. Everyone who needs someone to stand steady, even when it's hard, even when it feels like no one's watching. His small smile carried understanding beyond his years. In that moment, Mara saw a spark, a flicker of the same steadfastness that had once burned inside her. Back home, the community garden blossomed with life. Mara knelt beside a rose bush, her fingers brushing tenderly over the delicate petals. The vibrant colors were a quiet testament to growth, healing, and the strength that comes from enduring seasons of hardship. She thought about scars, not just the ones etched into her skin, but those hidden deep within the heart and mind. She thought about strength, not the kind measured in medals or battlefield feats, but the kind that surfaces quietly in everyday acts of presence and care. That evening, Jessie dropped by with a box of freshly baked bread. The simple gesture was a reminder that community was more than a word. It was a lifeline. Figured you might want some company, he said with a warm grin. They sat together on Mara's porch, breaking bread and sharing stories about the people who had passed through Willows Creek, their struggles, their triumphs, their silent battles. Jesse's words lingered in the night air. We forget a lot, he mused. But some stories, they always find their way back. Mara smiled softly. Like old wounds, she said. They remind us we're still here. They settled into a comfortable silence, the night wrapping around them like a protective cloak. In that quiet, Mara felt the heavy weight of loneliness lift just enough to let in a flicker of peace. The scar on Mara's back wasn't just a mark of pain. It was a testament to resilience, to honor, to the quiet strength that refuses to fade. In Willows Creek, she was no longer invisible. She was present, and that presence, steady and true, was more powerful than any medal. Weeks turned into months, and Mara's quiet presence began to ripple through Willows Creek in ways she never expected. She had always lived her life with the steady discipline of a warrior trained to endure, but now, without seeking it, she was becoming a beacon, not one of flash or noise, but of resilience, dignity, and the kind of quiet strength that moves mountains without declaring its power. Her conversations with the JROTC cadets became more than lessons. They became moments of connection. Mara didn't preach or lecture. Instead, she shared fragments of her life. Stories about missions in foreign deserts, scars both seen and unseen, and the unyielding resolve to hold the line even when everything else felt lost. She talked about loss, the weight of comrades never returning, and about humility, about the real courage found in choosing when to speak and when to listen. Each word was measured, each pause intentional, commanding attention without raising her voice. One crisp autumn morning, Mara's phone rang. The caller ID showed Colonel Reed. "We're organizing a regional leadership seminar at Fort Carson," he said, voice steady, but with an edge of urgency. "They want you to lead a session on veteran resilience and silent strength. No fluff, no spectacle, just real talk from someone who's been there." Mara hesitated. The thought of stepping onto a larger stage was daunting. The idea of being the center of attention was foreign to her. She swallowed and asked, "Why me?" "Because you're exactly who the next generation needs," Reed replied. "Someone who carries the weight but doesn't let it break her. Someone who's earned respect not through noise or medals, but through presence and integrity." The call stirred something inside Mara, a mix of apprehension, responsibility, and a flicker of hope she hadn't felt in years. After a moment, she nodded and said, "I'll do it." The seminar room at Fort Carson was stark. Rows of young officers and recruits sat, eyes wide and expectant. Mara stood before them, calm and composed, her presence filling the space without effort. She shared stories, not grand heroic tales, but small moments that captured the essence of service. The late-night watches, the quiet sacrifices, the scars carried long after the battle. She spoke of resilience, not as a flashy act, but as the steady heartbeat beneath every soldier's armor. She talked about humility, honor, and the power of silent strength. No medals flashed, no dramatic speeches, just truths spoken with honesty and gravity. After her session, a young lieutenant approached, eyes shining with newfound understanding. "You showed me what real leadership looks like," he said earnestly. "It's not about shouting orders or seeking glory. It's about steady hands in the dark, guiding when no one else can." Mara smiled faintly. "Hold the line," she replied softly. Back in Willows Creek, news of Mara's seminar spread quietly. The town embraced her anew, not because she sought recognition, but because she embodied it in every silent act of strength. She continued tending her garden, speaking with the cadets, and living in that sacred space between shadow and light. Because sometimes, the strongest warriors aren't the loudest. They're the ones who stand firm when no one's watching. The early morning mist clung to Willows Creek like a veil, softening the edges of the world. Mara stepped out onto her porch, the air cool and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The peace was a fragile thing, one she cherished but rarely took for granted. As she brewed her coffee, the distant rumble of an engine caught her attention. A black SUV rolled slowly down the gravel road, headlights cutting through the fog. Mara's gaze sharpened. The vehicle stopped in front of her house. The door opened, and out stepped a figure she hadn't seen in years, Captain Elias Monroe. Tall, lean, his face weathered but unmistakable. The man who had once been her commanding officer during some of the darkest missions in her career. The one who had vanished after the final deployment, swallowed by bureaucracy and silence. "Mara," he said, voice low but steady. "I heard about the ceremony, about the talks, about how you're holding the line." She studied him carefully. "Elias." He offered a small, respectful nod. "I'm here because you're not just holding the line, you're rebuilding it." They moved inside, settling at the kitchen table. Mara poured coffee while Elias unfolded a thick dossier. I've been working to get your unit's records fully declassified, he said, to restore the truth about what you all accomplished. The political fog has been dense, but things are shifting. Mara felt the weight of years in his words. Years of silence, sacrifice, and shadows. Why now, she asked. Because the world is finally ready to hear the real stories, Elias replied. And because some ghosts refuse to be forgotten. Their conversation stretched into the afternoon. Elias recounted details Mara had long buried. The missions that never made the headlines, the lives saved and lost, the betrayals that followed. But amid the darkness, there was also hope, a path toward recognition and healing. Mara listened, absorbing the truths and half-truths, the pain and the promise. When Elias stood to leave, he placed a hand on her shoulder. Will you stand with us? Help us bring the story forward. Mara looked out the window, watching the mist lift from the fields. I've held the line for years, she said softly. Maybe it's time to lead. Outside, the morning sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light over Willows Creek. And for the first time in a long time, Mara felt the future stirring, not as a shadow behind her, but a horizon ahead. The weeks that followed felt like a slow awakening, not just for Mara, but for the entire community that had watched her journey from silence to recognition. The news of her reunion with Captain Elias Monroe spread quietly but surely, stirring conversations long overdue. Together, they began working on a project to tell the real story of Mara's unit. It wasn't about glory or medals. It was about truth, accountability, and honoring those who never came home. Their meetings were meticulous, grounded in facts and memories, balancing the weight of loss with the resolve to reclaim dignity. For Mara, the process was both painful and healing. Going through after-action reports, letters, and testimonies brought ghosts to the surface, memories of firefights, close calls, and the faces of comrades who had been lost too soon. But it also brought clarity, the realization that their sacrifices would not be forgotten, that the truth would finally come to light. At the community center, Mara found herself standing before a crowd far larger than the small gatherings with the cadets. Veterans, families, local officials, and young recruits filled the room, eyes attentive and respectful. The air was thick with anticipation and quiet reverence. Elias introduced her simply. This is the woman who held the line when no one else could, who carried her team through shadows and silence. Tonight, she shares their story, our story. Mara spoke with calm authority, her voice steady yet full of emotion. She shared stories of resilience, sacrifice, and the quiet power of presence. She described the scars, both visible and hidden, that veterans bear long after the battles have ended. Her words were honest, humble, and raw, cutting through the noise of politics and misunderstanding. She spoke not just for herself, but for every soldier who had felt invisible, overlooked, or forgotten. We don't wear our scars for pride, she said softly. We carry them as reminders of the price of service and the strength it takes to keep moving forward. After her speech, a young veteran approached, eyes glistening with unshed tears. I didn't know what it meant to carry that kind of burden, he said quietly. Thank you for showing me strength without pride. Mara nodded, feeling a lump in her throat. Strength isn't always loud, she replied gently. Sometimes, it's just standing steady when the world doesn't see. Back home that evening, Mara found a letter waiting in her mailbox. It was from a mother whose son had been inspired by Mara's talks to join the military, a young man who now understood that courage meant more than bravado. The letter closed with a simple line. Thank you for holding the line. Mara folded it carefully and placed it beside the wooden box holding her brother's dog tags. She felt a quiet peace settle in her chest, a balm to years of silence and solitude. That night, under a sky strewn with stars, Mara stood on her porch. The scar on her back lay hidden beneath her sweater, but its weight felt lighter, not because it was gone, but because it was finally seen, understood, and honored. In the stillness, she whispered a promise, to herself and to those who had fallen. I will keep standing. I will keep holding the line. Because true strength isn't just about the battles we fight. It's about the honor we carry in the space between. The morning sun poured gently through the curtains, bathing Mara's modest living room in a soft, golden glow. There was a stillness in the air, a calm tension that felt like the moment right before a storm, or the moment before peace finally settles. Today was the day Willows Creek would honor her and the countless sacrifices that had defined her life, not with grandeur or spectacle, but with quiet dignity. At the memorial park, a small crowd had gathered, friends, neighbors, veterans, and family members. Faces lined with weathered years, some familiar, some new. Among them stood the young cadets Mara had mentored, their eyes bright with admiration and understanding. Sheriff Keller stood near the back, his expression unreadable but respectful, his hat removed and held in his hands. And there, near the front, was the young deputy, the same man who once arrogantly demanded Mara remove her jacket. Mara arrived with measured steps, wearing a simple sweater that concealed the scar etched deep into her back, a silent testimony to battles fought and burdens borne. She moved toward the small wooden podium, her heart steady despite the weight of memories pressing in. Elias Monroe, her former commanding officer, opened the ceremony with a heartfelt speech about resilience, sacrifice, and the enduring spirit of those who serve. He spoke of shadows endured, of the invisible wounds carried by veterans, and the quiet courage it takes to keep moving forward. When it was Mara's turn, she stepped up, her voice calm but filled with an undeniable strength. She reached behind her sweater and touched the scar, her fingers tracing the faded lines. For a long moment, she let the crowd see what had been hidden for so long. The scar was not just a mark of pain. It was a symbol of survival, of honor, and of unyielding strength. The young deputy stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. Without hesitation or words, he raised his hand in a crisp, formal salute. The crowd fell into a hush, every breath held tight. Mara met his eyes, returning the salute, slow, deliberate, and full of the weight of years. It was more than a gesture. It was a moment of restored dignity, of quiet justice. No louder than a whisper, yet more powerful than any shout. The sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows over the assembled crowd. Mara felt a peace settle deep inside her chest, a peace earned not through battle, but through presence and honor. She was no longer invisible. She was a symbol, the embodiment of silent strength, resilience, and the unspoken courage of those who stand firm when no one else is watching. The scar on her back remained, a badge not of shame, but of pride, and Mara wore it with quiet dignity, forever holding the line. Thank you for following Mara's story. If it moved you, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories honoring the silent strength of veterans.